Okay, picture this. You are 300,000 years ago. You have just been absolutely yeeted off a charging bison during a hunt. Your leg is broken, your arm might be broken. You are not sure because everything hurts equally. And here's the really fun part. There are no hospitals, no painkillers, no antibiotics, no surgeon, no anesthetic. The most advanced medical technology your civilization has to offer is a guy named something like Grunt, who once watched someone else deal with a similar situation and sort of remembers what they did. Good luck. You're going to need it. Or, and this is the part nobody tells you, maybe you're not going to need it quite as much as you think. First, let us be clear about what we're actually dealing with here. Because in the Stone Age, getting injured was not an inconvenience. It was a career-ending, potentially life-ending event. And by career, I mean the career of being alive. Hunting large animals with hand-thrown spears? Inherently risky. Walking on uneven, rocky terrain every single day? Ankle sprains waiting to happen. Childbirth? A medical emergency in slow motion, basically every time. And if you got a deep cut that got infected, in the modern world, we have antibiotics. In the Stone Age, you had vibes and the healing power of hoping really hard. So the fact that anyone survived anything is honestly already impressive. But what the archaeological record actually shows us goes well beyond impressive. Here's where it gets genuinely interesting. When archaeologists dig up Stone Age skeletal remains and examine the bones, they keep finding the same thing over and over again: broken bones that healed, cleanly, correctly, in ways that only happen if the fracture was stabilized and the person was kept still and cared for over weeks and sometimes months. And some of these individuals had injuries so severe that there's absolutely no way they could have fed themselves, defended themselves, or done basically anything useful during recovery, which means someone else in the group was doing all of that for them for months for a person who was, from a purely survival economic standpoint, dead weight. And they did it anyway, which is either incredibly compassionate or extremely inconvenient, depending on how you look at it. So, what were they actually doing when someone got hurt? Let us start with the basics. A cut or a puncture wound. Priority 1, stop the bleeding. Priority 2, stop it getting infected. Priority 3, do not make it worse. Which sounds obvious, but is genuinely harder than it sounds when your medical toolkit is whatever is growing nearby. And here's the thing, what was growing nearby was actually pretty useful. Certain mosses were applied to wounds as natural compresses. They absorb blood, they have mild antibacterial properties, and they are essentially free and everywhere. Specific leaves were used as poultices to draw out infection. Tree sap was applied to seal open wounds. None of this was random. This was tested, accumulated, passed down knowledge. These people were not just slapping random plants on injuries and hoping. They were slapping the right plants on injuries with a reasonably good understanding of why those specific plants worked, which is, I would argue, medicine. And the plant knowledge goes much deeper than basic wound care. Willow bark. Yes, the bark of a regular willow tree contains salicylic acid, which is the compound we now synthesize artificially and sell to you as aspirin. Stone Age humans were chewing willow bark for pain relief and fever reduction. Yarrow, a common flowering plant, has genuine wound-sealing and anti-inflammatory properties and has been found packed into Neanderthal burial sites, which strongly suggests it was being used medicinally. Charcoal was used for infection. Clay was applied to draw toxins out of infected wounds. These are not silly folk remedies. Several of them are the empirical foundations of actual pharmacology. The only difference between a Stone Age healer and a modern pharmacist is about 300,000 years of paperwork. Now, let us talk about broken bones, because this is where it starts to get really impressive. When archaeologists examine healed fractures in Stone Age remains, they find clean alignment. The broken bone ends were brought together correctly. This does not happen by accident. You cannot just lie there and have your broken femur helpfully wander back into the right position on its own. Someone set that bone. Someone understood that the alignment mattered. And then they immobilized it, branches for splints, cord or hide for binding, and kept the person still and cared for while it healed over. Weeks. This is functionally identical to basic fracture management in modern wilderness medicine. The materials were sticks instead of fiberglass. Everything else was the same, which means someone 300,000 years ago was essentially doing what a trained first responder does today. They just didn't have the certificate. Okay, we need to talk about trepanation, because trepanation is where this episode stops being impressive and starts being absolutely unhinged. Archaeologists have found Stone Age skulls with deliberate, clean, circular holes cut into them. And before you say, well, maybe that happened after death, they found bone regrowth around the edges of the holes. Bone only regrows in living people, which means these holes were cut into living human skulls, intentionally, with stone tools, tens of thousands of years ago, without anesthetic, without a surgical theater, without antibiotics for the aftermath. Someone was performing brain surgery in the Stone Age, and the patients, multiple of them, survived. I need you to sit with that for a moment. Brain surgery survived 30,000 years ago. You cannot even get a same-day GP appointment today. So why was anyone doing this? The leading theories are actually fairly reasonable, which makes the whole thing only slightly less alarming. The most likely reason is severe head trauma. A bad blow to the skull in a fight or a fall can cause internal bleeding and pressure that builds and kills if not relieved. Drilling a hole in the skull relieves that pressure. It sounds horrifying, but it is also correct, and neurosurgeons still do a version of it today. Other proposed reasons include persistent severe headaches, seizures, and in some cases, ritual or spiritual purposes, which is the medical explanation equivalent of, and sometimes people are just weird. But whatever the reason, performing this procedure required knowledge of skull anatomy, a controlled technique, and the ability to manage a massive open wound on someone's head while they were awake and presumably extremely unhappy about the situation. Trepanation is not even the most extreme thing in the archaeological record, which is a sentence I did not expect to be writing today. Evidence of deliberate amputation has been found at multiple Stone Age sites, limbs removed cleanly at or near a joint, rather than torn or broken, with surrounding bone showing post-operative healing. The most remarkable case was found in Borneo, a skeleton dating back over 30,000 years, with a lower leg removed below the knee with a clean, precise cut, and evidence that the individual survived for years afterward. Years after a Stone Age amputation, which means someone performed the surgery, managed the wound long enough for it to heal, and then fed, protected, and supported this person through months of recovery, and then for years after that, 30,000 years ago, in a cave. I truly cannot stress enough how impressive this is. Now, the obvious question, all of this, the brain surgery, the amputations, the bone setting, was happening without modern anesthetic, so how were they managing the pain? The honest answer is imperfectly, and probably extremely unpleasantly, but not entirely without options. Willow bark, as we discussed, is a real painkiller. Certain plants with numbing or psychoactive properties were available in many environments and have been used by hunter-gatherer groups extensively. Some researchers believe that fermented fruit, essentially very crude alcohol, was used as a sedative before particularly nasty procedures. None of this is morphine. None of it is getting you through a leg amputation with a smile on your face. But it is the same fundamental problem solving that eventually, after many thousands of years of refinement, produced modern anesthesia. Someone had to start somewhere. It just turns out that somewhere was extremely painful. But here is what I think is actually the most remarkable thing in this entire episode. The most powerful medical technology available to Stone Age humans was not a plant or a stone tool or even the knowledge of how to drill a hole in someone's skull with minimal collateral damage. It was the group. Every single healed fracture that required weeks of immobility represents a real person who could not hunt, could not gather, could not do anything useful, and was kept alive anyway. Every successful amputation represents months of recovery during which someone else was doing everything for that person. The archaeological evidence for long-term care of injured and disabled individuals in prehistoric communities is not rare or ambiguous. It is everywhere, and it is consistent. Stone Age humans looked after each other. The community was the hospital. And honestly, given the surgery was being done with stone tools, I think we should all be very grateful the community was excellent. It would not be honest to end here without acknowledging what they could not do. Internal injuries from a hunt, a punctured organ, or a severe internal bleed were almost certainly fatal. Infections that spread past the initial wound would kill before any plant medicine could stop them. Sepsis from an unclean wound was a death sentence. Childbirth complications claimed enormous numbers of lives. The Stone Age medical toolkit was genuinely remarkable for what it was, but it had hard limits. People died of things we would treat in an afternoon, and many of the people who performed those remarkable surgeries and set those bones and kept their communities alive through months of recovery also died of things they could not fix. The wins were real, so were the losses. One last thing worth understanding. All of this knowledge, the plants, the fracture setting, the wound care, the deeply unsettling but apparently effective brain surgery, none of it lived in books. None of it lived in institutions. It lived in people. Specific individuals within each group were almost certainly the earliest version of what we would now call a physician. And when that person died without passing their knowledge on, the community lost medical capacity, possibly permanently. When they passed it on carefully and completely, the next generation was better equipped. The knowledge itself was the most precious medical resource they had. Which is why, when archaeologists find evidence of someone clearly keeping an injured person alive through months of care, they are not just looking at compassion. They are looking at a community making a deliberate decision that the knowledge and the person carrying it were worth the cost of keeping alive, even when it was inconvenient, especially when it was inconvenient. No hospitals, no surgical teams, no pharmacies, no x-rays, no antibiotics, no anesthetic beyond some bark and a prayer. And yet, they set broken bones, they treated infected wounds, they performed surgery on living human skulls with stone tools, they amputated limbs and kept people alive through the recovery. They built a pharmacopoeia from plants that researchers are still studying today. And they did all of this while also trying to find food, stay warm, avoid being eaten, and raise children. Stone Age medicine was not primitive. It was the beginning of everything that came after. It was just extremely, profoundly, breathtakingly inconvenient to receive. Next time, we look at one of the hardest truths of Stone Age life. Like and subscribe so you do not miss it.